You've probably clicked on this video because you're a young professional and you're thinking about moving overseas for work. But maybe you aren't too sure where to get started or what the process actually looks like. Last year, I moved from Sydney, Australia to New York City, and I was able to do it because I managed to get a job at a law firm in New York, all while doing virtual interviews from Sydney, Australia. So in this video, I'm just going to walk through the process that I went through so that you can get a better idea of what to expect. And I'm just hoping that my experience can help you out, whether you're still considering whether or not you want to move, or whether you've already started that process. I think right off the bat, it's important to address the timeline, and that is that there is no definite timeline. Things could happen very quickly, but things could also take a while, so you need to be prepared for both scenarios. I've heard mixed things. I had a friend who wasn't even really looking for a job. They just had a recruiter reach out to them and they thought they'd just submit their resume and see what the market looks like. And within a few days, they got an interview for a position in San Francisco, and then went on to do that interview 1 week later and then got the offer 1 week after that. So their process moved insanely quickly. Me, on the other hand, from when I started seriously looking and applying to when I accepted my offer, it was about a total of 5 months. The first step in your journey is to network. It sounds obvious and cliche, but the more people you know, the more you expose yourself to potential opportunities. It may seem impossible to be networking across the world in a city that you may never have even been to, that with people you've never ever met in person. But with the internet and video calls, it is very possible. For me, wanting to move to New York, I went on LinkedIn, I filtered for the location of New York City, and then I searched for people in companies and positions that I was interested in, and I shot them a LinkedIn request, and then a quick message with just a little bit about myself and why I'm reaching out, and whether or not they'd be open to maybe having a video chat with me. I think another good approach is to find other Australians or people that have a similar background to you currently, and just ask them about how they made that leap and to tell you about their individual journey. And that can give you a lot of insight for the steps that you need to take to actually make it across. But be aware, the hit rate is low, so be prepared for the majority of people not to respond at all. You really need a mix of the person being active on LinkedIn and checking those messages, as well as finding a person that is willing to chat to a complete stranger. But it is just a numbers game at that point, so don't be disheartened, just keep sending those messages out and you will find plenty of lovely people that are willing to take the time out to chat to you. Another really good thing to do is to also find friends or friends of friends that are also going through a similar journey or have just recently gone through the process themselves, because going through something as big of a challenge as this can be fairly daunting, so sharing that experience is always really helpful. Okay, so if you're applying to law firms, which is what I did, you need to prepare a really good resume and a deal sheet and get a really good recruiter. And on recruiters, I wouldn't be too shy about using multiple recruiters. They often are getting the same or similar listings, but you just want to make sure that you're covering all your bases. But you do need to make sure that you are tracking what applications are going out from which recruiter, and not to let them overlap because it can have a bad look. You also do not want your recruiter just to have carte blanche to just shoot your resume out to whoever they want. You want to know exactly where your resume is going and what role it's for, and you want your search to be somewhat targeted. Another important note for finding a good recruiter is that you want them to have the ability to have their feet on the ground in the city that you're applying for. What this means is that if you're talking to a recruiter in Sydney, you want to make sure they have a direct counterpart in the city that you're applying to that has local connections. You want your recruiter to actually have personal relationships and connections within the companies and the firms you're applying to. You don't want to go with a recruiter that is just gathering up as many CVs as they can get and just shooting them at the wall and hoping some stick. You want a recruiter that is actively trying to find a good fit for you and your experience and is willing to leverage their relationships for you. And the next part is the hardest part: securing an interview. It's tough because you don't have much control over it. Once you've prepared your CV and your resume and maybe a cover letter, and you've got recruiters working on getting your foot in the door, there's not much left to do but wait. So don't be disheartened if you just aren't getting interviews immediately. It's not necessarily a reflection of your experience or what's on your CV. It's also extremely dependent on the individual company as well as the job market and whether there is demand for those positions. It is really important, specifically to the US, is that if they could hire domestically, they would. It's only when the demand for positions gets so great that they can't find people to fill those positions domestically that they look overseas. Whether it's because that job or role has a really specific experience requirement that, only very few people have, or whether it's because there's just so much going on that they can't find enough bodies. So this does mean that you do need a little bit of luck on your side and for the job market to be somewhat in your favor. I got my job at the end of 2021 when the job market was on fire, and now in 2023 it's quite the opposite, so I imagine it'd be a little bit tougher. But once you manage to secure an interview, you'll be straight into preparing for it, and they usually give you about a week from when they notify you that they want to interview you, and they'll schedule a time slot for you within the following week. So what does the interview process actually look like? Well, for me, it was fairly straightforward. It was literally just a 2-hour call in which I had 4 separate interviews, 2 with senior associates and 2 with senior partners. I remember having the calls at like 6 a.m. in the morning because of the time zone, so I had to get up nice and early to make sure I was prepared, make sure the internet and everything was working before hopping on those calls. But for me, my experience was that the calls were very conversational. They weren't just quizzing me and asking me behavioral or technical questions. It was more of a get to know you conversation and trying to flesh out my experience. I could tell that the vibe was that they were looking to see if you had the requisite experience, and if they thought that you did, they were just trying to work out what type of person you were and if you were a person that they'd be able to get along with and work long hours with, pretty much. So it's really important in the interview to just be yourself and to build that casual and friendly rapport. A couple of the main questions that I was asked was the classic, tell me a bit about yourself. It may sound simple, but it is an extremely loaded question that you need to have a prepared response to. You need to be able to explain your background and your experience and where that's all led up to, and also where you're hoping it's leading to. Another question that was asked was, what have you done in your current role, or what are you currently working on? And this is more of an invitation to sort of go through your CV and your resume, to sort of walk through your experience, what deals or what matters you've worked on, and what level of responsibility you've taken. So you do need to have a good grasp of what you've included on your CV and your deal sheet and be ready to talk about it. And another big question I was asked was why I want to move to New York City. And I think this question is just to work out what your intentions are, whether you're just there for a quick trip and an exchange program of sorts, or whether you want to stay long-term and build a career with the company. Of course, if your intention is to just do a quick stint overseas and come back, you don't need to say that, but you just need to make it clear you're going over there with a long-term view to grow with the company. And of course, at the end of the interviews, they'll always ask if you have any questions. So have some questions ready to go, asking about, their practice specifically, trying to understand how work is distributed, trying to work out what the learning curve will be like. Again, it's really important in this interview process to just back yourself and to be confident. Always remember that if you have gotten an interview, that means that your CV and your experience is enough. So don't feel like an imposter. They know what your experience is based on what you've written, and they just want you to elaborate on that. And I think it's also really important to show that you are enthusiastic and you're willing to learn and to grow, because you will be thrown into an entirely new environment, and there will be things that you don't know and things that are completely different to what you've done before. And it's important for them to know that you aren't going to fold under that sort of hardship, that you're willing to start from scratch in some areas. After the interviews, I'd also recommend sending off thank you emails to the people that you spoke to, along with any follow-up questions you might have. I got my offer about a week after I did my interviews, and it was an extremely amazing feeling. It just felt like all the hard work that I put in had finally paid off. And I was just sort of in shock because I just couldn't believe that I was going to be moving to New York. The call was an informal offer. They sent a more formal written offer later, and they also asked if I had any further questions, anything I wanted to talk about, and they also offered to put me in contact with other associates and other partners to chat about the firm. And at this point, they're sort of pitching you now. For me, I only did the one interview and accepted that offer. I had gone through the process for quite a bit of time. I didn't have any other interviews before that, and with the deadline for which they gave me the offer, I didn't feel like I could just wait around and hope that more interviews would pop up. So I ended up going with the firm. So once you get that offer, be sure once you get it in writing to read it through thoroughly, understand what the offer is, and be sure to negotiate. Have a chat with your recruiter about what they've seen other people get, and try to make sure that you get yourself a good deal. Things you should be negotiating include bar support, how much leave you get for sitting the bar, whether or not they're paying for your expenses to sit the bar, whether or not they're paying for a bar preparation program. You've also got things like relocation support, whether or not they're going to cover the costs of you shipping your stuff, flying across, doing your visa, and whether or not they're putting you up somewhere for the first month or so. And you also want to know if there's a signing bonus. And on top of all that, you also want to work out whether there's a clawback period. Period in which, if you were to leave the firm, maybe like 3 months into your role, they would ask for all this money back. And the next step after you've negotiated all of those things is to accept the offer and get ready to move. Making the move often sometimes can be oversimplified. You see a photo of someone at the airport saying, "See you later," and you think, "Oh wow, cool, the person's just moved overseas, must be pretty simple, must be pretty straightforward." But there's just a lot that goes into this journey that you might not see until you're in the process yourself. Finding the right opportunity at the right time can be difficult, but if it's something that you really want to do, I really would encourage you to just go for it. And don't get disheartened if it doesn't happen quickly for you. As long as you keep taking positive steps forward, you keep networking, you keep applying, you'll eventually find the right fit. I had always wanted to move to New York ever since I was in high school, and in 2019 I had started work and I was gassing myself up to make the move in 2020. But of course, with the global pandemic, I wasn't going anywhere. So I just waited it out, and as things sort of started to get back to normal, I started applying again. And like I said, it took me about 5 months from when I started applying to actually securing the job. And then on top of that, it took me another 5 months to get my visa before I actually started the job. The visa conversation is for another video. But I'm honestly so glad that I kept pushing forward and trusting the process, because even though it didn't go according to plan, I'm here now. If you're thinking of maybe moving overseas, or you're in the process of doing so, and you have any questions, feel free to let me know in the comment section down below. I'll definitely be responding. Anyways, hopefully this video all made sense. If you want to find out more about what it's like to be a corporate lawyer, go ahead and click this video right here. Thank you again. Bye.